Chairman, so if you're ready, we can go live. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you, Ms. Bird. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members and members of the public. Welcome to this licensing subcommittee held on Monday, the 28th of September. We are sitting here under the auspices of the Licensing Act 2003 to hear an application made under the Act. My name is Councillor Mark Durham and I have been appointed the chairman for this meeting. This meeting is held under regulations which came into effect on the 4th of April in response to the COVID-19 situation, and there are just a few new housekeeping rules to run through. First of all, could I ask everyone present in this meeting to ensure your microphone remains muted and your video feed off when not addressing the committee. This will help to reduce background noises and avoid any unintentional disturbances. This meeting is being hosted remotely, streamed live and recorded, and by being present in the meeting, you are giving your consent to being recorded. Members and officers, during each item, please use the chat function of the meeting to indicate you wish to speak. I will then invite you at the appropriate time. Members are reminded that apart from indicating you wish to speak or that you have to leave the meeting, the chat function should not be used for questions or any other purposes or comment. Please do not use the raise hand function, as this may not be available on all member devices. When speaking and referring to the agenda papers, please ensure you reference a page or paragraph number. And lastly, if members need to leave the meeting at any point, please make this known and use the chat function to signify that you need to leave the meeting. Now I'd like to ask officers taking part in this meeting to introduce themselves, starting this time with Mr. Quelch.
Afternoon, Chairman. Simon Quelch, and I'm the lead legal specialist and the legal advisor for the subcommittee this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Quelch. Ms. Latimer.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Lacey Latimer and I'm a licensing officer for Malden Council, and I'll be presenting the committee report this afternoon.
Ms. Bird.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Tara Bird. I'm Committee Services Officer for the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And are there any other Malden officers present, please?
Yeah, my name is Damien Geller. I'm the lead specialist for community at Malden District Council.
Thank you, Mr. Geller. In the absence of any other officers, Ms. Bird, could you now carry out a roll call of the members to confirm who is in attendance here, please?
Yes, of course, Chairman. Members, if I call your names, could you just indicate by turning your camera on and your microphone whether you're present, please? So starting with Councillor Durham's obviously here. Councillor Siddle, please.
Good afternoon, Tara. Present. It's unusual being first with my surname.
I've really confused matters. Thank you. Councillor Stilts.
Good afternoon, Tara. I'm present, thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Mrs. Thompson.
Good afternoon, Tara, everybody. Yes, I'm present, thank you.
Thank you very much. And could I ask, Chairman, if there's any members in attendance, if they could introduce themselves, please?
I can see Councillor Bassinger and Councillor Morris. Third.
Good afternoon, Tara. It's Councillor Bassinger in attendance.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bassinger.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chrissy Morris in the house.
Thank you, Councillor Morris.
Thank you very much, members and officers. Have we any apologies, please, Ms. Bird?
Chairman, no apologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is disclosure of interest. So to disclose the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interests, other pecuniary interests or non-pecuniary interests relating to the items of business on the agenda, having regard to paragraphs 6 to 8 inclusive of the Code of Conduct for members. And members, you are also reminded that you are required to disclose any such interests as soon as they become aware, should the need arise throughout the meeting. If any member has an interest to declare, please use the chat function now to indicate, and I will invite you to speak. I will go first. In the interests of openness and transparency, it is not a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest. I have been a personal licence holder for approximately 30 years. Any other declarations of interest?
Chairman, no one else has indicated they wish to speak.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So now we move on to item 5, the application for a premises licence at the Jolly Sailor, Church Street, Malden, Essex. So I refer everybody present to the aid memoir that you'll find on page 3 of the agenda pack, which details the procedure we have to follow at this meeting. Can I ask everyone that everyone has read the officer's report and appendices and the evidence submitted, albeit it's extremely lengthy, which was circulated prior to the meeting? Should anyone have any late documentation in support of a representation or the application, this may only be introduced with the consent of all parties. Members, are you happy just to confirm that you have been supplied with the full documentation?
Confirm.
Yes.
Thank you very much, members.
Confirm.
So just to reaffirm, members, because this is a very important meeting, if you wish to speak, please make this known and I'll come to you, hopefully in turn. It's only a small number of members, so hopefully we can keep it in order. I'd be very much appreciative if you keep your points clear and succinct. Right. Can I now ask a persons present at the meeting to introduce themselves? And I think we're going to start with Mr. Geller.
Hello there. So my name is Damien Geller. I'm the lead specialist for Malden District Council Communities.
Thank you, Mr. Geller. And for the information of members, Mr. Geller is referred to as the applicant on this occasion. Now we have Mr. Seeley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Seeley, I'm a solicitor at a firm called Ellison's, and I'm representing the premises licence holders today, Mr. and Mrs. Brett. Mr. Brett is here. I'm going to swing my camera around. We are socially distancing, so apologies for that, but hopefully you can see him roughly there.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Brett. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I'd like to call on Ms. Latimer to provide us with a brief outline of this application, please.
Thank you, Chair. The committee is requested to consider an application made by Environmental Health to review a premises licence under Section 51 of the Licensing Act 2003 and have regard to representations made during the consultation period that followed, in line with the promotion of the following licensed activities, namely the prevention of crime and disorder, the prevention of public nuisance, the protection of children from harm. There are no recommendations, but in considering the representations received and what is appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives, the steps the committee can take are outlined in paragraph 4.2. The Jolly Sailor is a public house which is situated on the corner of the Hythe and Church Street. A copy of the premises licence is attached as Appendix A. On the 10th of August 2020, the Licensing Department received an application for a review of a premises licence from Environmental Health for the Jolly Sailor on the grounds of the prevention of crime and disorder, the prevention of public nuisance and the protection of children from harm. A copy of the full application for a review of the premises licence is attached as Appendix B. The application has been properly made in accordance with the Licensing Act 2003 and all procedures correctly followed. The public notice was properly displayed and copies of all application served on the premises licence holder and responsible authorities. The application was also advertised on the Council's website. During the consultation period, responses have been received from 5 members of the public. I have attached these responses as Appendix C. The current licence was grandfathered in 2005 from the magistrates. The licence holders are Mr. Alan Brett and Mrs. Kerry Brett, whom the review application was served. The designated premises supervisor is Mr. Alan Daniel Brett, who has been in this role since the 6th of September 2019. The licensing authority is required to hold a hearing to consider the review of an application and any relevant representations made. The committee is required to give appropriate weight to the review application, representations, including supporting information, presented by all parties. The guidance issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003, the Council Statement of Licensing Policy, and any steps, if any, that are appropriate to promote the forward licensing objectives. Having considered those relevant matters, the Licensing Committee can take such of the following steps, if any, as it considers appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives: to modify the conditions of the licence, to exclude any of the licensable activities from the scope of the licence, to remove the designated premises supervisor, to suspend the licence for a period not exceeding 3 months, to revoke the licence, and for the purpose, the conditions of the licence are modified if any of them are altered or omitted from any new condition added. It should be noted that clear reason must be given for the decision. Any additional or modified conditions should be practical and enforceable. The applicant for the review, the premises licence holder, and any person who made relevant representations would have the right of the appeal to the Magistrates' Court on one of the grounds provided in Schedule 5 to the Licensing Act 2003. In addition to determining the application in accordance with the legislation, members must have regard to the common law rules of national justice, provisions of Human Rights Act, consideration in Section 17 of the Crime and Disorder Act. I would invite members to read point 3.14 and 3.15 of my report. Members, I hope you've all had the opportunity to read my report before this meeting. There are a number of relevant sections contained within the Statement of Licensing Policy that I would like to draw to your attention. The list is lengthy and therefore I summarise so that you can take into account of these later. At 74, regarding crime and disorder, licence holders should demonstrate the impact factors. A list is included below. At 81, the licensing authority interprets the term public nuisance in relation to its meaning in common law. This includes issues such as noise nuisance, light pollution, smells, litter and antisocial behaviour, where these interfere with public as a class of citizens and not merely one person. At 82, applicants should demonstrate in an operating schedule the measures that have been identified to prevent public nuisance, relevant to the individual style and characteristics of their premises and events. At 85, when addressing the issue of the prevention of public nuisance, an applicant should demonstrate the impact factors that impact on the likelihood of public nuisance that have been considered. Although not definite, a list of factors is included in my report. At 92, although the licence was grandfathered, applicants should identify suitable and sufficient measures that will be implemented and maintained to protect children from harm, relevant to the individual style and characteristic of their premises and events. At 83, whilst children may be adequately protected from harm by the action taken to protect adults, there may also be special consideration and no policy can anticipate every situation. When addressing the issue of protecting children from harm, a licence holder should demonstrate these factors, which may include a list is provided in my report. At 94, an example list of control measures is referred to in assisting licence holders to put safeguards in place to protect children, and I would recommend members have regard to this list contained in my report. Members must consider the representations made by the applicant and any other relevant representations, consider the licensing objectives, statutory guidance and the licensing policy, and determine the application. As stated at paragraph 3.10, members are reminded that they have the following options if they decide when determining this application. The options are set out below. An appeal against the review decision may be made within 21 days following receipt of the notification of the decision by the licensing committee, by the licence holder, environmental health or any other person making relevant representations. That concludes my report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms Latimer. I would now like to invite the applicant, Mr Geller. Would you like to make an opening statement, Mr Geller?
Thank you, Councillor Durham. Hello, everyone. Hello, members. As mentioned earlier, my name is Damien Geller. I'm the lead specialist for Malden District Council. And what that means is that I've got functional control over environmental services, housing and waste management. And so as such, when cases reach a sufficient level of concern, they're escalated to me for more robust action. In relation to the Jolly Sailor Public House, again, as mentioned before, it's a premises that's on the corner of the Hythe and Church Street, and its main building was undergoing refurbishment at the time wherein this investigation and concerns were raised. So I first became aware of issues regarding the Jolly Sailor around the 18th of May 2020, and this was just around the time when the government had offered guidance in relation to pubs providing takeaway services as a means of carrying on their business. In order to facilitate this, the licensee chose to erect 2 gazebos on an area of land referred to as the upper deck. From here, food and drink was sold to members of the public. And when I say food and drink, this also includes the sale of alcohol. And I refer specifically to exhibits DG 14, 19, 30 and 31 as examples of this type of behaviour. Since commencement of that particular type of service, the council received numerous complaints from elected members and members of the public in relation to social distancing, increased in litter, public nuisance and lack of PPE being used by staff when serving. Now, representatives for the Jolly Sailor claimed that there was a lack of investigations in relation to these concerns. But what I would say is we are talking about new legislative requirements that came in around the time of COVID, which slowed and changed the way certain things had to be investigated, and things were investigated and engagement was put first. And we dealt with the complaints by way of initial conduct, initial engagement with people, including the licensee holder and including complainants externally. We did carry out additional patrols, and we also issued guidance to the licensee, Mr. Brett, and this was contained within EXDG 22. And in terms of the extra patrols and the extra picture and evidence that we gathered, that was covered across EXDG 27, 28 and 30. There's a suggestion that there was no causal link. And what we're saying is basically that the method of service delivery was such, and bearing in mind, you have to remember at the time that we were in the case of a national lockdown, most premises were shut. People were allowed to go out for a certain amount of time to exercise, and the operation of the Jolly Sailor was such that it was the only draw in town for that area of the Hythe, and therefore it provided a excuse for people to come and gather and remain within a certain area. In terms of, so we do believe that there's a causal link there. In terms of the mitigations, advice that we offered, there was a suggestion that we didn't sort of offer advice. Well, we did. It's contained within EXDG 22. In terms of the policing powers, no actions were taken and so on. I would say that we don't have the police's details in relation to any FPNs that are issued, but we did certainly, when we started to get complaints regarding this area, we did start to look at additional ways of controlling some of the nuisance that we were reports that we were receiving at the time, and this included the consideration of dispersal zones, looking at the possibility of public space protection orders, and also other mitigating factors in terms of what could be done to try and control the operation the Jolly Sailor was carrying out. In summary, we believe that the serving areas on the upper deck and the ability to provide off sales during the height of the lockdown has acted as an enticement, as a draw for people coming into the Hythe, because it provides easy access to alcohol and food within a fairly, within a pleasant setting, and the operation. The setup kind of gives the impression of an open air bar, while other premises opted to remain closed. And examples of this, again, are contained within EXDG 14, 19, 30 and 31. We offered advice to Mr. Brett on the 10th of June 2020. However, we continue to receive complaints regarding lack of PPE and people gathering in the locality. And in terms of the lack of PPE used by Mr. Brett's staff, this is referenced in EXDG 26. but it's also in evidence in his own picture evidence of page 81 and page 91, which shows some of his own members of staff in the serving area without any protective equipment on. We also continue to receive public complaints, and that's referenced within EXDG 24 and others as well. And we believe that without new conditions to mitigate how the Jolly Sailor operates going forward, particularly in relation to the upper deck, we'll continue to see instances and complaints of litter, drunkenness, and concerns regarding social distancing. This is especially concerning, obviously, in light of the new COVID increases that's being reported, and in terms of the more stringent rules about how people may gather. And we believe that new conditions or prohibitions to the Jolly Sailors licence will help the council in its endeavours to try and mitigate the alcohol-related nuisance that occurs in the locality, to offer additional protections to the Jolly Sailors' own staff by perhaps causing them to really focus on making sure that PPE is used amongst staff, and to improve the safety for local residents and passers-by during the pandemic. So, sorry, that's my summary in conclusion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Geller. I understand there is no nobody from the police. Do you have any other witnesses that you would wish to call before members get an opportunity to ask you questions?
No witnesses from me.
Members, before we move on to the licence holder, you have the opportunity to pose Mr. Geller questions. Please make sure they're open questions, not leading questions, and related to the evidence that you have heard. Members, please indicate via the chat function. Mr. Councillor Siddle.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Geller, in terms of the visits by yourself or by other council representatives, who went down to the premises and looked at what was going on there, and what exact site did you have personally? In terms of the PPE, again, is that something that used or we have exact evidence in terms of when it was used and when it wasn't used? And do we have any, are there any police cases? Is there any complaints from parents about the effect that it had on children? Because obviously that's one of the areas that we're being asked to look at. So what issues do we have exactly in terms of evidence that children are affected by the operation of the Jolly Sailor?
Okay, I'll do my best to answer those. In relation to who visited, the Jolly Sailor was visited by 2 community engagement officers. You'll have to bear with me and I'll just get you the dates.
If I can help, Mr. Geller, 24th of the 5th, there was one.
That's right. So I refer to my evidence bundle, paragraph 28 and 29. So the 16th of the 6th, patrolling officer from the community engagement team attended, and that's EXDG 27. You've also got a video supplied by a council contractor on the 15th of the 6th. That's EXDG 26. Now those are the 2 video clips. And in terms of photos that were supplied, I had photos that were supplied by one of the community engagement officers, and that was on the 17th of the 6th, EXDG 28. So there was one by a contractor on the 15th of the 6th, one by community engagement officers on the 16th of the 6th, followed up by photos on the 17th of the 6th. So those are the visits that were done. In terms of myself, out of hours, I have done a drive-by of the local area, so I am familiar with the layout, and I've seen some of the bits and pieces that have gone on there. But because this was out of hours, out of official capacity, I haven't included that. In terms of personal protective equipment, The evidence that we're relying on in terms of personal protective equipment, I'm not saying personal protective equipment wasn't used at all. There are instances, and you can see from Mr. Brett's own pictures, there are some instances where they are in use, but then there's other pictures where it's not in use at all. Now, the guidance in relation to protective equipment and its use in relation to COVID, there are some exemptions. Some of these exemptions have been tidied up and tightened, particularly in relation to the latest round of guidance given by the government. But nevertheless, all of that is contained within the official guidance that, when serving customers, protection should be provided both for staff working next to each other and also some sort of barrier for members of the public that might be being served. So there is guidance in relation to PPE that we've referred to, and there were instances where we've seen breaches of that. And in relation to complaints regarding children, we haven't received any specific complaints from residents or people passing through that specifically mention children. What we have noticed, though, the reason why that was included was because when we look at the pictures, it's quite clear that the Hythe is a gathering area for all sorts of different people. It's a very scenic area, and there are lots of families going through there, families with young children. And again, I would draw attention to the fact that this was at the height of lockdown, when transmission fears were at their highest, and most areas of Malden seem to be able to maintain social distancing as well as could be expected. But within the Hythe, it was very, very, very busy, and that's with families, and families with young children. You've seen through some of the pictures that are included within the evidence bundle that there are large groups of young teenagers, there are large groups of adults, there are large groups of parents with children, and that's the reason why they were included, because they were one of the risk factors, basically.
Okay, could I come back, please, Chairman?
Of course.
Yes, of course, Councillor Siddle, yeah.
In terms of the videos, I presume the one in the van is the contractor?
Yes.
What's the relationship between the driver of that van and the business owners of the Jolly Sailor? Is there, because if you watch that video right at the end,
yeah,
the worst possible language is used on that video in reference to the people at the pub. So I've got concern that the person who supplied that video has supplied that video in a subjective and not an objective manner. So do you know of any difficulties or any relationship between the driver of that van and the owners and operators of the pub?
No, I'm not aware of any connection between the driver of that van and the pub. What I would say is, as far as I'm aware, in terms of the business types of the contractor and the pub, there is no immediate link. There's nothing that associates the two business that would bring them into connection with each other, as far as I'm aware.
So I was extremely shocked when I listened to that video, because the person on it uses the worst possible swear word.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But that is how the evidence was supplied, unfortunately, and in order to give a unredacted view, that was the comment.
So in terms of the business operating and in terms of what they were doing wasn't illegal.
Which one? So you're referring to the Jolly Sailor?
So in terms of the Jolly Sailor, in terms of so it wasn't illegal, but what they weren't doing was in your view, is they weren't operating in the correct way. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So again, I mean, I've tried to make it clear in the evidence that the Jolly Sailor isn't wholly to blame for everything that goes on down there. That's not what we're trying to say. What we are trying to say is that the method in which they chose to operate this serving area from the upper deck did cause and contribute to people gathering in that area, caused an increase in littering, and perhaps at the worst time when there's no services for people to use, people are limited in what buildings they can access. People were feeling trapped because of lockdown, and obviously that was the one place where they could get release, and perhaps the worst place that they could get release from lockdown.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gaylor.
Thank you, Councillor Siddle. Any other members of the committee wish to cross-examine Mr. Geller? Mr. Geller, I would just like to ask if during this period the Jolly Sailor was open and operating, albeit outside, during this time was the pub just around the corner, which is visible from the Jolly Sailor, that is the Queen's Head, were they operating in any capacity at all?
Not as far as we were aware. All the evidence and the reports I've got have indicated they were closed.
Thank you very much. And I just want to be clear on the legal position regarding PPE. We are aware from the latest government guidelines that now it is a legal requirement for retail and hospitality staff to wear face masks, but at the time that wasn't the case. So in effect, they weren't contravening, or the staff weren't contravening the PPE guidelines, government guidelines, and and at the same time, the customers at the pub again were not required to if they were in the process of consuming food and drink, as I understand it. Could you confirm that's correct, please?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other members wish to? I'm going to come to, I know Mr. Seeley wishes to cross-examine Mr. Geller, which is your entitlement, sir, but I'm going to come to Mr. Quelch first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a point, it's only the committee, Mr. Seeley and obviously Mr. Geller, that actually have the evidence itself. And so when mention is made of the evidence bundle, like, for example, exhibit numbers, I think it might be useful just for that particular person. So if the public are listening in, to know just exactly what that document is, perhaps in a sentence, because that is not available to the public, just so that the public can follow what's happening more easily.
Sensible guidelines. Thank you, Ms.
And maybe perhaps, Chairman, I could just ask, just for the sake of clarity, if you think this is helpful. If not, then you'll say it's not. One of the licensing objectives is, of course, that's in question here is the matter of crime and public disorder, prevention of crime and public disorder, and the other one is public nuisance, prevention of public nuisance, and prevention of harm to children. I don't know whether it's helpful, Chairman, if actually Mr. Geller actually sets out exactly the main points so that everyone understands, and then it may help Mr. Seeley in his questions as well. Each particular point that he's saying there is, for example, what crimes he's saying were committed, or what public disorder, or what he fears may actually happen in terms, because it's prevention of crime as well. And the same with the other two headings. I don't know if you think that's helpful, Chairman.
It is, Mr. Quelch, because I think that in order to avoid a misunderstanding, we are not here to make decisions whether government guidelines have been broken, whether in respect of PPE, etc., because those are completely separate laws. We are here to determine this in respect of the Licensing Act 2003, and it is a prerequisite of licence holders. They must operate their premises in line with the 4 licensing objectives. So that is what we are here to decide, not whether or not they have breached the law in respect of PPE. So to be very clear, the question we need to ask ourselves is, by the actions that we have seen and had evidence to support or otherwise, have these objectives been breached? 1, the prevention of crime and disorder. 2, public safety. 3, the prevention of public nuisance, or 4, the protection of children from harm. That is what we are actually here to decide. So, Mr. Geller, I don't know if you have any further comments before I come to Mr. Seeley.
I can refer to the actual application where I've tried to set out against those headings what it is we feel has occurred, has been, has caused us to put the application review in. Perhaps if I go through that, that might be helpful.
That would certainly be useful. Yeah, thank you.
So in relation to the prevention of crime and disorder, we believe that the availability of alcohol served by the Jolly Sailor led to a rise in littering and waste within the locality. Now, despite claims that litter was being picked up by the licensee staff, the council did notice an increase in deposits of alcohol-related litter along the Hythe, particularly along the front of the Jolly Sailor, which resulted in the need to provide additional waste receptacles. There have been reports as well of people under the influence of alcohol attempting to board moored vessels without authorisation and acts of public urination, drunkenness and aggressive behaviour, which required police attendance and which affected local residents. So in terms of prevention of crime and disorder, that's what we're suggesting were the concerns. In relation to the prevention of public nuisance, the government provided guidelines in concerns to social distancing, which continue to remain in place and indeed have been bolstered. Now, the aesthetic nature of the area and the availability of food and alcohol for the Jolly Sailor over the period of lockdown did draw large gatherings to the local area in a manner which breached those guidelines and we believed represented a health hazard. The government guidance for the operation of takeaways also provided advice on the use of personal protective equipment, and that included fixtures, fittings for both the public and staff. Now, despite assurances from the landlord, the council believed the Jolly Sailor's adherence to the advice was very loose, and it represented a risk to the safety of staff and also to the public, and therefore lessened the mitigation for COVID transmission. Reports also received alleged that the Jolly Sailor was playing loud music on a number of occasions in a way which encouraged a party atmosphere to occur on the Hythe. Now, obviously, this is an allegation. If this would be in breach of the government guidance at the time, which stated that people accessing the area should be encouraged to leave at the earliest opportunity. And obviously, if you're playing music in a way that sort of contains people in an area, then obviously that's a concern. And there were additional complaints regarding loud music from local residents and concerns regarding people being under the influence of alcohol. And I've referred to, again, the attempt to board moored vessels and the public urination. So in terms of prevention of public nuisance, that's the concerns we had there. And although I've mentioned it briefly, I'll just go through it again. In terms of the prevention of harm to children, the Hythe is a popular part of Malden Town Centre, and it's a popular walkthrough for young families and people with dogs. The manner in which the Jolly Sailor operated encouraged people to congregate in the locality, and as such, the council believes that this represented an increase to the risk of COVID transmission through the lack of PPE and the lack of social distancing. And as such, the council believed that this also represented an increased risk to children and young families passing through the area. So that.
Thank you, Mr. Geller. Members, I'll give you one last opportunity on the basis of what we've most recently heard. Any other questions you want to ask Mr. Geller before we go to Mr. Seeley?
Not from me, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, members. Mr. Seeley, thank you for being patient, sir. It's this is your opportunity to cross-examine the evidence that has been given by Mr. Geller before you come to your support of the licence holder submission.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Geller, can we just start with some very sort of basic information? You've produced a bundle of documents, much of which are apparently email complaints and items of that nature. What's not apparent, and I understand why, because of rules on redaction and what have you, is how many individuals those complaints ultimately emanated from. Are you able to tell us that?
I would say it would be more than four. And the reason why I can't give you a definite number, I can certainly go back and tally it out, but just off the top of my head, I know that it was more than four.
And when you say more than 4, do you mean 4 individuals from 4 different households, or 4 individuals potentially from 1, 2, 3 households?
No, I believe 4 individuals across completely unrelated.
Okay. Now, just a few hopefully uncontroversial things that I just want to give you the opportunity to disagree with if need be. Mr. Brett, been the licensee of the Jolly Sailor for over 31 years. You accept that, do you?
Yes, yep.
And certainly since 2005, since the council has been responsible for licensing matters, would you accept that there have been no cause to take any action against the premises license?
Yes, I believe so. There's nothing that I was referenced on any of the documents that I've got.
Thanks. And then one other general thing about the lockdown, you I think used the phrase, if you'll excuse me for saying so, but you used the phrase lockdown rather loosely in your presentation. I think I'm right in saying, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that these allegations, they cover the period the 15th of June to the 15th of May to the 27th of June. And it was 2 days before the 15th of May, the start of this period, that the rules were eased, weren't they? And so what happened on the 13th of May was that individuals were allowed to engage in unlimited public exercise. They were allowed to meet one other person outside, but they had to maintain 2-metre distancing. So we're not talking about the very height of the lockdown. Is that right?
No, we're not talking about the very height of lockdown. We are talking about the tail end of it as businesses started to become reopened.
Great, thank you. And clearly you've accepted that the Hythe is a very picturesque and popular area. It's going to attract people, isn't it?
Yes.
A, on a sunny day, B, in a period when the height of lockdown has been eased and people are allowed outside again.
Yes.
Yeah, great, thank you. And do you accept the general proposition that I've made in our representations that whether you like it or not, the Jolly Sailor has no jurisdiction over what happens when customers leave its premises? So it can't enforce any legal powers regarding littering, it can't enforce social distancing rules, it can't control noise nuisance, and it can't control where people decide to urinate. Is that fair enough?
Yes, the only caveat I would add to that is no other businesses were in operation at that time, and therefore they were the main draw there. So anything that did happen there, from the information that we had, they would have been a factor in that, a draw, an enticement.
Okay, well let me just come back to you on that point, because I don't think we accept, well I know we don't accept, that no other premises were open during this period, and we cover that in my representations, which members of the committee can see at page 52 of the supplemental bundle that was served over the weekend. So during the period we're talking about, I'm going to put it to you, Mr. Geller, that the following premises were open. Firstly, there were about 5 food and soft drink kiosks in and around the Hythe and the Marine Lake and Promenade. There was a seafood stall that sold food and alcohol. There was an ice cream van, which we see on many of the photographs, and which I'm sure will feature later on today. There is the First Stop off licence, which isn't very far away. There's Malden Discount Food. There's an M&S. There's a Co-op, an Iceland, Malden Newsagents, Tesco's, Morrison's, the Sark Restaurant, and the Mighty Oak, and they're all within, well, less than a quarter of a mile of these premises, and they were all open during the period you're talking about. Do you accept that?
I accept that a lot of those businesses, well, I accept the businesses were open, the ones that you've mentioned. I would say that a lot of those are on the high street, so they're away from the Hythe area, although within walking distance. In terms of the local businesses operating on the Hythe, as far as the details that we've got suggested that that most of them were closed, as far as I remember. You are correct. There is some sort of ice cream van that was present, but I don't recall ever seeing it served. People purchasing from it, and certainly within the pictures that I remember seeing, I can't say for sure if anyone is purchasing or if the van is in operation or not. But yes, I accept that it was present.
Well, do you think that the ice cream van would have hung around there, A, not serving, and B, just would have hung around there if nobody was buying ice cream from them?
Again, with some of the lockdown and some of the restrictions, I'm not sure about what people were intending to do with those businesses. Businesses were trying to figure out new ways to provide their services. It may have been the case that the ice cream van was parked up there with the owner not being present until he figured out what he was going to do next. He could have been a local resident. I don't know. I don't have that detail, so my apologies. I can't answer that question clearly.
Okay, let me come back to you on two of those points, Mr. Geller, because Mr. Brett lives on the Hythe. He lives in the premises immediately adjacent to the Jolly Sailor.
Yes. Yeah.
And his evidence will be, and I'll ask him to confirm this when it's our opportunity to speak, that A, the ice cream van was, whenever it was there, it was serving, and B, that those 5 kiosks and the seafood stall that sold food and alcohol were all serving during the period covered by this application. So if Mr. Brett confirms that when it's his opportunity to speak, you'll accept that, will you? Because you've got no evidence to the contrary, have you?
No, I mean, I would only refer to the pictures that we've got that have been supplied. Like I said, I can confirm the ice cream van was present, but I haven't seen within the other pictures anything that indicates these other stalls that you mentioned.
Right, but that brings me on to another point, Mr. Geller, which is that I can't see any obvious evidence that in respect of any of the allegations that you level at the Jolly Sailor, that you've done any work to establish for certain where the persons allegedly perpetrating these things actually came from.
In what respect? Because obviously we have officers that have patrolled the area, and you can see people, lined up there. In terms of the litter that was in the immediate area, yes, you're right. You can't say 100% that bottle came from the Jolly Sailor, but what you can say, for example, is that Jolly Sailor was selling similar bottles, similar produce. I accept the fact that Mr. Brett has advised that his staff were trying to litter pick in the area, but obviously we've got pictures that show litter in the area. So
okay, well, just pausing there then, the photos that I think you're referring to, Mr. Geller, are the ones principally at EXDG 30. Is that right? That's members of the committee. That's starting at page 44 of the original bundle that you received. Am I right about that, Mr. Geller?
I'll just bear with me a minute. I'm just going through the evidence bundle myself. So I would draw attention to, for example, EXDG 14.
Hang on, just okay. Pausing there.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Tell me of those photographs. There's only one that shows any litter. Which of those items do you think, or can you show that came from the pub?
No, I can't. I can't say that. I can only say that there are items there. I can only say that there are items there that may have come from the pub, and that's the same with any piece of litter that's in that locality.
Okay. Where, in fact, is that photo taken?
Where?
Yeah, where?
Within that locality, I believe. Obviously, there's nothing to give it contextual reference, but I believe it's in reference to Church Street.
Okay.
Mr. Seeley, I'm going to interject at this opportunity. I know the direction of your questioning, which I appreciate. However, I would like to ask you, how many of the premises that you have just mentioned have a premises license that includes the sale of alcohol for consumption on the premises?
On the premises or off the premises?
On the premises. On the premises. I'm speaking in relation to, as I said, the premises license for sale of consumption on the premises, and And do you accept that a lot of these businesses that you have mentioned, for example, the kiosks, whereas they may have been able to be open and trading, because they are not covered by the Licensing Act 2003, they don't have to comply with the licensing objectives. So by bringing them into this equation, I'm afraid that's, in my opinion, irrelevant. And I would draw members' attention to the photograph, photographs that have been mentioned by Mr. Seeley on page 46 and 47, which show the odd bottle in flower planters. But I would then bring members' attention to the photograph on page 48, where I don't think anybody can say that these people accumulated there are not related to the sales that are being carried out at the Jolly Sailor. Perhaps you could answer my question. How many of the premises that you have mentioned have a license to sell alcohol on the premises?
On the premises, I would say that the only ones would be, bear with me a second, would be the Sark restaurant and probably the Mighty Oak. But what we're really talking about, as I understand it, Chair, is the impact of off sales in this application, not on sales. In respect of off sales, all of the off licenses that I talked about, all those supermarkets, they all have permission for off sales, as did the fish stall, the seafood stall on the promenade, which could sell food and alcohol.
Yeah. I think the point you're making is perfectly fair in respect of the complaints about litter, but with greatest respect, I don't think that they're relevant in relation to the public order. But I will enable you to keep cross-examining Mr. Geller. So.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies if I'm going slightly off course. What I was really trying to bring Mr. Geller towards are the photographs at EXDG30, because really these are the primary photographs in his bundle that show bottles, alcoholic bottles and glasses that might potentially come from the Jolly Sailor. And the significance of these photographs, Chair, which I cover in our representations, is that these photographs, it's clear from the introduction of EXDG30, because it's an email sent at 9:04 a.m. on the 20th of June 2020, is that these photographs were taken the morning after this funeral or wake that happened on the quayside, which was nothing to do with the pub, and I've explained in our representations why it was nothing to do with the pub, and in respect of which the pub closed early that evening because of what was going on down at the Hive. The significance being that because the pub was closed early, there wasn't the usual litter pick by members of staff because they left, because the area was becoming somewhat heated. And so to the extent that you might, in theory, be able to tie some of these particular bottles and glasses back to the pub, there's an explanation for why they weren't collected. And really, that's the critical evidence, as far as I'm concerned, in relation to the allegation of littering, specifically littering that might be tied back to the Jolly Sailor. That was what I was trying to get to, but perhaps I will move on. Mr. Geller, you touched briefly in your presentation about some of the powers that the council or the police might have chosen to take, but perhaps didn't. And I just want to ask you about those in a little bit more detail. I think you said in your presentation that you don't have any details available for the committee about whether either the council or the police issued any fixed penalty notices during this period for either breaches of the social distancing rules or anything to do with public urination or breach of the peace. Is that right?
Yeah, no, we well, certainly in relation to Malden Council, we haven't issued any community protection notices or any such like for that sort of behaviour within the Hythe area. In terms of the police, in relation to both COVID and antisocial behaviour, we don't have any details of any fixed penalty notices they may or may not have served.
OK, the police were presumably a relevant authority who could have made relevant representations in support of this premises licence review, weren't they?
Yes, they were copied into the details.
Yeah, and they've chosen presumably not to make any representations at all.
No, while they are aware, and I've referred it through to the Community Safety Partnership, they've issued no statements to us. No.
So as far as we're aware, then neither the council nor the police took any steps that they could have taken in terms of, if you like, nipping these problems in the bud by exercising, quasi-criminal enforcement procedures.
I would like to draw attention to one aspect that might, if you like, clarify what the stance was. If you just bear with me a minute, I'll just need to find reference to it within the evidence bundle. Okay, we have an email sent on the 26th of the 5th, 2020 from PCSO Brett Fleming regarding incidents at the Jolly Sailor, which occurred on the 23rd of the 5th and the 24th of the 5th, and their concerns relate to lack of social distancing. So this is EXDG9. And really, I suppose the picture from the police was that, the COVID legislation in relation to social distancing was very new, very untested. We all know that. And it leads on the fact that we engage rather than enforce. And in terms of engagement, the police attended and they've fed back. And I've included some emails from the police licensing team when they've attended and they've seen certain things. But when it came to, if you like, enforcement and following on from the discussions that I had within the Community Safety Partnership, it was decided that we would take action under the licensing conditions, because obviously in relation to the COVID enforcement, it's a very sort of softly untested approach. In terms of what was going on at Jolly Sailor, we were of the mind that obviously we needed to do something to just try and control the services that were being provided from the upper deck. And that's what really this is focused on, which makes it more of a licensing issue as opposed to, if you like, an enforcement issue.
But if you accept that once a customer leaves the immediate vicinity or the licensed premises, the Jolly Sailor's licensed premises, which include the deck area, if you accept that at that point the Jolly Sailor has no jurisdiction over what they do, where they go, how they behave, then you can understand, can't you, the significance of my questions about, in those circumstances, what did the responsible authorities, the council and the police, do to enforce the law?
Well, I mean, you can see where the police have attended and they've engaged, engaged and given words of advice. In terms of
sorry, Mr. Geller, but where have they done that? I think you're rather overstating the case there. I mean, we've had there's two video clips which show some kind of enforcement officers walking through the Hythe on one day, and then the next day some people driving past the Hythe. At no point do any of those clips show any member of the authorities engaging with anyone about their behaviour, whether anyone at the Jolly Sailor or anyone on the Hythe.
I'd refer to EXDG9. Just wondering if you heard about Jolly Sailor last night, 23rd, 24th. Police were called to the pub about selling food and beer from a tent in the pub. Sunday, There was a disturbance, a fight. Spoke to some local people who said the landlord was a "don't mess with me" type, and he says he knows all about the law. So the police did engage there.
Well, okay, I'm going to pause there, Mr. Geller. Yeah. Sunday, there was a disturbance called in, speech marks, fight. Now, the way I read that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that someone has telephoned the police and said there's a fight near the Jolly Sailor. Is that right?
Let me see. I can only say it just says called about. It might have been a phone call.
He's not saying, the police officer's not saying, I witnessed a fight at the Jolly Sailor, is he? He's saying there was a disturbance called in, speech marks fight.
Yeah.
Accept that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So quite conceivable that the Jolly Sailor in this context is used as a local landmark. It's near the Jolly Sailor. I mean, we haven't got any details there, have we?
No, I agree with that point.
Right. OK, so let me read the next sentences to you. I spoke to some local people who said the landlord comes across as a bit of a dope mess with me type and says he knows all about the law. He's not very popular with the locals. He's having lots of work done on the pub, lots of scaffolding, etc. Where in those sentences does it say that the police engaged with Mr. Brett in any way, shape or form about that incident?
No, I can see that point.
It doesn't say that, does it?
I can't point to that.
No. And my point is that aside from the letter that you wrote to Mr. Brett initially, and then the exchange of emails that you had with him, there is no evidence whatsoever of anybody engaging with any other individuals in relation to what was going on down at the Hythe during this period. Do you accept that?
I would disagree with that. I would go to EXDG8, email from Rachel Saville, police licensing officer, where she actually says she spoke to, I've spoken with Alan Brett, the manager, and the DPS of the Jolly Sailor. And there's a few different points that are discussed. It looks like a discussion took place in regards to difficulties with a neighbour. Mr. Brett advised that he was no longer selling draft. I understand that he tried to sell draft and it didn't work out, so he decided not to sell draft. So the discussion there about what they were doing at the place and some of the difficulties they were experiencing. It references that he feels that he's getting blamed for a lot of issues in the locality. So there was a discussion that took place quite early on involving the police licensing. And what I'm trying to say is, we did have these discussions, and the purpose of this isn't to try and make the Jolly Sailor out to be the absolute villain. That's not the circumstance.
Video feed. Yeah. OK. Well, that's an interesting email that you're referring to there, EXDG8. Yeah. So members of the committee, just so you can follow this if you want to, this is page 14 of the original bundle that you were provided with by committee services. So one of the things that was discussed with PCSO or PC Saville on the 26th of May was the CCTV that's available at the Jolly Sailor. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it says CCTV is an operation. This covers the outside areas and the quay and is available to view if anyone wishes to do so. Did anybody at Maldon District Council ever ask to look at that?
No.
Why not?
As we understood it, basically we were doing patrol, or we were intending to do patrols around that time. You are right, Mr. Brett did offer the use of CCTV. To be honest, we felt the evidence that we had and the information we had access to, if you like, explain the situation and show the situation in the area quite concisely. We're not really sure what additional information his CCTV could have offered, but perhaps in hindsight it would have been better to try and access something.
Because I'm gonna try and put in front of my screen a live feed. This is a live feed of the quayside right now.
Yep.
There are about 35 cameras at the Jolly Sailor, about 5 of which cover the Hythe area, and nobody has ever come to look at any of them. Now, given the seriousness of the allegations that are in front of Mr. Brett and the possibility that the council might take action such as removing permission to do off sales, would you not have thought that that simple measure would have been an appropriate thing to do to ensure that actually what the council had was a full and proper understanding of what was going on down at the Hythe, rather than just sending a couple of people down a couple of times and doing 30 seconds or a minute of video?
No, I think that's being a bit disingenuous, really. And the reason why is because, again, you know, we are talking about within the lockdown scenario, whether it's, you know, towards the end of the situation or whatever, but we are talking about a situation where it's very difficult for officers to carry out direct investigations in the same way. We have to try and get evidence in sort of different ways, or perhaps more socially distanced ways. We were getting pictures coming in from members of the public. We had our own officers out patrolling the area. I myself had gone down there on a CCTV, would have been additional information. I don't agree with the comment that the matter wasn't investigated fully. It was investigated, and we've obviously come to a conclusion, and all we're doing is presenting the information we've got and the concerns that we've got regarding the situation.
Well, I think we'll have to disagree about whether you investigated properly or not, Mr. Geller. OK, so I was running through. Sorry, Chair, I am going to be as quick as I possibly can now, but this is very important stuff for the Jolly Sailor. So I hope you'll give me some leeway on this. So, Mr. Geller, we've established that so far as we know, no fixed penalty notices issued for any offences. Do you know if anyone was arrested for anything like public urination or breach of the peace or anything like that?
No, I don't believe anyone was.
Right. OK. Tell me then about the possibility of a dispersal order. I think you said in your presentation that this was briefly considered. Members of the committee, it may be helpful if I just explain something about what dispersal orders are. They are powers given to local authorities and the police under the Anti-Social Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act. And where a dispersal order is made, they entitle police officers and authorised council officers to direct people who are causing antisocial behaviour or crime to leave an area covered by a dispersal order and not return for a period of up to 48 hours. So in the context of what we're talking about here, very, very useful powers that could have been exercised. Do you accept that, Mr. Geller?
Oh, absolutely. I can give you some of the background to that if you want. Just to explain what the thinking was at the time, if members would find it useful.
Yes, please. Yeah.
OK. Yes, so I can advise that a dispersal order was discussed. And the main reason why it was decided that it wouldn't be the best method forward is because, firstly, as Mr. Seeley has commented, dispersal order is a police-led power. They enact it. And if they decide to enact it, it has to be agreed at inspector level and it has to be resourced properly. And it was felt at the time that with everything else that was going on, you have to remember that I think a number of officers were concerned about issues that were going on in other parts of Essex, so Chelmsford, for example. And there was concern that they wouldn't be able to fully support a dispersal order. And within that discussion, we talked about public space protection orders, which I know Mr. Seeley has mentioned, and it is something that we are looking at in a medium term to longer term. And again, it came back to the issue of, right, well, if we can't use a dispersal order, if we don't think we can, you know, put it in place at a time when it's going to be effective, what other powers do we have? And again, this has led to the situation we're now in. OK,
so a dispersal order not done because you, the police, don't have the resources to police it.
Yeah, that was.
OK. And similar reason for not imposing a public spaces protection order?
Public space protection order is right. So I've joined Malden Council in January. So that's how long I've been here for. And since that time, I've reviewed various different bits and pieces that are in place across the district. I support the expansion of a public space protection order, but that's a big piece of work and it takes time. It takes the gathering of evidence. And again, we're talking about a power that really takes months to bring into place, not weeks. And really, it was felt that something needed to be done sooner rather than later, because again, we're talking about the gathering of people, COVID transmission. You are absolutely right. A public space protection order does have very useful powers that we would consider using, and that's something that's occurring in discussion separately, but it certainly wouldn't be something that would be ready to mitigate some of the circumstances we've seen so far.
But the truth, Mr. Geller, is we are now months. We are.
Mr. Seeley, yeah. I hate to interject. This is your opportunity to cross-examine Mr. Geller on the evidence that he gave, and I think we are straying into other what-ifs. If you could restrict your questioning to the evidence that Mr. Geller give, Mr. Brett, the licence holder, will have his opportunity to speak in a minute, and obviously members and officers will have the opportunity to cross-examine. And you are a witness, I understand, for Mr. Brett, so that will be your opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I've got about 4 or 5 further questions then, and then I will stop.
If they can be fairly.
They'll be very simple questions.
Thank you, sir.
So, number 1, Mr. Geller, when was the council-owned public toilet block down on the Hythe reopened?
I don't have that date to hand. I know that it was around, I believe it was towards the end of May, but you'll have to excuse me, I don't have that date to hand. I wouldn't want to mislead anyone.
The information I have that it was around about the 15th of June when the lockdown measures were further eased, when non-essential shops were allowed to open.
If that's the case, I wouldn't dispute that.
OK, that's going to have sorted out any public urination problems, isn't it? You would hope.
Yeah, no, the complaint certainly dropped off around that time, yes.
Yeah, OK. Now, the next thing I just quickly want to ask you about, so number 2, your exhibit EXDG 22.
The email, yes. Yeah.
Yes, so this is the email that you sent to Mr. Brett, outlining some measures that you thought he should take in response to various issues that have been raised by you. And so members of the committee, sorry, if you want to look at this email, it's page 34 of the original bundle that you were provided with by committee services. And what you said, Mr. Geller, in the penultimate paragraph of that email on the 10th of June was, to support your social distancing measures and signage within your premises boundary, the council will be looking at providing additional signage along the quay.
Yeah.
Was that done?
No, it's not been done as yet. I can only say that it's a point that I continue to push on.
So 3 months down the line, 3.5 months down the line, we don't have the one thing that the council said it was going to do in an email on the 10th of June.
No, I would accept that criticism.
Yeah. And whereas if you look at EXDG 23, all of the matters that you asked Mr. Brett to attend to were attended to the same day or the next day.
I would disagree with the issue about staff wearing PPE, but I do accept that Mr. Brett came back very promptly and answered with those points, yes.
OK. OK, question number 3 then. Tell me about additional efforts made to empty the bins or increase bin capacity along the Hythe during this period.
OK, again, you'll have to excuse me if I don't have the details to hand. What I can tell you is that we installed an additional waste bin along the Hythe area.
One bin?
One of the large Euro bins.
Yep.
From the details that I can recall, it does get filled up quite quickly, and we've got additional collections in place to empty that. The stuff that we're picking up from there is a mixture of stuff that's come from people bringing stuff from the outside, other shops, and also some of the things that they perhaps purchased from the Jolly Sailors serving area. OK,
so you introduced one extra bin and you somewhat increased the frequency of collections.
Yeah.
OK, and just the final thing then, in terms of the steps that you took to investigate a specific causal link between the issues that you've raised and customers of the Jolly Sailor. Sorry, what exactly are you saying that you did to establish that causal link rather than, you know, it being a problem that may have come from other causes?
Sorry, just repeat that question again.
Yeah, so this issue about the problems that you're complaining of, are they problems caused by customers of the Jolly Sailor, or are they caused by people either A, coming from elsewhere, or just nothing to do with any premises, you know, and just passing through? What efforts have you made to investigate that question, bearing in mind how many other premises there are, you know, in the vicinity who can serve, in particular, food, but also alcohol and non-alcoholic drinks?
So really, it was down to the you know, local residents' complaints, where we've gone back to people and said, look, you know, what are you complaining? What's the circumstances? They're the ones that have supplied evidence or alleged evidence about what they feel is happening down there. We've spoken to Mr. Brett about some of those concerns. Now, I do understand that he says that it's not all down to his patrons. And so really, I wouldn't apportion full blame to every single person that goes through the Jolly Sailor. And I've not tried to say, again, that everything is down to them. What I would say in terms of a causal link, we have residents' complaints that are saying that it's their patrons that are causing issues. They've sent in evidence that they're saying is attributable to their patrons. Can I guarantee that every you know, picture shows a direct link to the Jolly Sailor? No, but there are certainly some things that are attributable. So I would certainly say there's a partial causal link in terms.
Okay. But you can't say how much.
No.
No. Okay.
Thank you.
Chair,
have you concluded?
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Seeley?
You've obliged me greatly. Thank you.
Well, I think I've been extremely lenient, but due to the importance of this, I'm more than happy to have indulged you. Thank you very much. Can I just clarify something, Mr. Geller? Can I clarify the fact that the licence curtilage includes this so-called upper deck level, and that the premises licence includes the sale of alcohol for consumption on and off the premises?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Hopefully we've got everything we need from that. Okay, so now it's the opportunity for the licence holder. Mr. Bett, you can now address the panel and call a witness should you so fit.
Chair, me again then, I'm afraid. Mr. Brett, as I say, is sat beside me. I will pass the camera over to him in a little while just to confirm that what I'm saying is accurate, and if there's anything else that he wants to add. But you will hopefully have received the representations that we submitted last week. That I think they were in your supplemental bundle starting at page 51. I don't intend to go through every word of that, but bearing in mind what Mr. Quelch said about the fact that members of the public listening in on this call are not able to see those documents, I think it is only right and proper that I do summarise what those representations say. So let me start by explaining, yes, Mr. Brett, he's the designated premises supervisor. He lives in a building immediately adjacent to the Jolly Sailor. His front door leads out onto the Hythe, so he is always around and is very much a witness of what goes on in the Hythe area. He has held the premises licence, or the old liquor licence in the old days, for the Jolly Sailor for over 31 years. He has an unblemished record during the whole of that period. So these allegations, they cover the period from the middle of the middle of May until nearly the end of June 2020. Throughout the whole of that period, the Jolly Sailor was undergoing an extensive internal refurbishment, meaning that amongst other things, the toilets were out of use. But the pub has reopened to the public. It reopened fully to the public insofar as it's allowed to on the 4th of July, and that includes the toilet areas, which actually is the same day Mr. Brett informs me that the public toilets, or there or thereabouts, opened on the Hythe as well. So hopefully any allegations relating to public urination are very much matters in the past. And of course, Mr. Geller has accepted very wisely throughout this this hearing and before that in doing what it did, namely serving food and alcohol from the patio area, the upper deck area, the Jolly Sailor wasn't doing anything unlawful, wasn't doing anything wrong, because the licensed area includes that patio area. It's licensed for the off sales of alcohol, and the food that was sold is not in fact a licensable activity at all, because it was only sold until at the latest 10 p.m. at night. And late night refreshment, which is the licensable activity under the Licensing Act, concerns food sold between the hours of 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. So none of the food was a licensable activity, not within your jurisdiction in any way, shape or form. Despite what Mr. Geller says about 4 households having complained, it's actually Mr. Brett's understanding that it might be nearer 2 households who have complained, but obviously we can't substantiate that because everything is redacted. So we made some general comments on the evidence submitted by Mr. Geller in support of the review application. So that's exhibits EXDG 1 to 33, and those general observations fall into sort of 5 simple categories, if you like. The first one is that there are relatively few individual complainants and almost no independent verification of the allegations that have been made by those complainants. And to the extent that any relevant authority, whether the council or the police, has proactively investigated the allegations, the extent to which they've done so, in my view, is extremely limited, and that is concerning, given, as I say, the potentially devastating impact that the outcome of this review could have on the economic viability of the Jolly Sailor. The second general point, which I know I've already laboured in my cross-examination, is that there's no evidence to establish an express causal link between the issues complained of and the Jolly Sailor, as opposed to that long list of other outlets that were able to sell items, food and drink, alcohol and non-alcohol, to members of the public, all within a quarter of a mile radius of the Hythe area, and without any investigation into those causal links. It really isn't at all clear in my submission why Mr. Geller has sought to apportion sole responsibility or even primary responsibility to the Jolly Sailor, other than any one of a number of other premises that might have been, in inverted commas, responsible. And the third point is that against the background that Mr. Geller accepts that what the Jolly Sailor was doing was lawful, what he hasn't been able to satisfactorily explain is what the Jolly Sailor could have done but didn't do to mitigate the matters that were complained of, even assuming that there was evidence to show that it was the Jolly Sailor's, in inverted commas, fault. As I've already said, neither Mr. and Mrs. Brett nor their staff have got any jurisdiction over what customers do once they leave the curtilage of the premises. By contrast, of course, the police and council officers have very extensive powers, which I hope I've outlined in some of my questions. And what's interesting about that is that actually Mr. Geller well knows this, because in the only formal letter that was written to the Jolly Sailor in advance of this review application, that's his exhibit EXDG 11, none of the measures that he perhaps now says should have been taken but weren't taken were actually raised as steps at which he said the pub should have been taking but weren't taking. There was nothing about stopping people littering. There was nothing about stopping people urinating. There was nothing about trying to control people when they left the premises. It was all about what was happening within the curtilage of the licensed premises, and as I've explained in these submissions, and when we were looking at exhibits EXDG 22 and EXDG 23, the steps that were recommended to Mr. Brett by the council were taken almost immediately. And of course, there will always be examples, particularly in terms of PPE, where individual members of staff at individual times are not wearing PPE. But as we've, I think, already identified, PPE at the time was not mandatory. And so Mr. Brett couldn't have enforced the mandatory wearing of PPE all the time in any event. And of course, the other thing to say about PPE is that one of the great advantages of the way that this premises decided to set up to do takeaway sales was that it did it in the open air, where the risk of transmission is far, far more limited than it would have been had those takeaway sales been happening from indoors or inside a hatch or anything like that. The flow of air would have meant that the risk of transmission of the infection was, in my submission, negligible. So the fourth general observation is the point that I've already made, and so I won't labour it, that in contrast to the measures that Mr. Brett was able to control and did take, if you contrast against that the measures that the council and the police were able to take but didn't take. Even something so simple as putting up extra signage on the Hythe, which was promised on the 10th of June by Mr. Geller, still hasn't happened, and it's now the 28th of September. So the council hasn't really covered itself in glory in terms of responding to these allegations, and instead what it seems to be doing is trying to put the blame solely on a licensee who doesn't have the authority to do the obvious things that might have made a difference here. And of course, the final general point to make is that actually the most beneficial and contextualised evidence that we have about what was actually going on down at the Hythe are the two video clips. Now, I heard members of the subcommittee talking about those clips immediately before or immediately as I came online this afternoon, and I don't know the extent to which you've all been able to view them. Just so you know, I've been able to view them, but I couldn't hear any sound on any of them, so I don't know anything about the apparently rude word that was said at the end of, I think it was the second clip, the one inside the vehicle. But in my submission, the most important and significant thing about those two video clips, which I would certainly ask members of the committee to view very, very carefully before making your decision today, is that they show the Jolly Sailor complying with its legal responsibilities. There is obvious evidence of social distancing, of PPE wearing. There is, in my submission, very good evidence actually also of social distancing in and around the Hythe by everyone who's circulating in that area. And of course, it's a curious side effect of social distancing, that the more people observe social distancing rules, the busier an area will seem, because they will stretch out over a larger space by maintaining social distancing. So what in ordinary times, in pre-coronavirus days, might have been a crowd of 15 people that might take up a very small area, will suddenly, with social distancing rules, take up a much larger area and will have the side effect of making an area look much busier than it actually is. So, members of the committee, my submissions then go on to a detailed response to the allegations. And this is the bit that I invite you particularly to take as Mr. Brett's evidence, and I will, as I say, hand over to him in a little while just to ask him to confirm that what I'm saying is accurate. But I'm going to ask you to look at the supplemental bundle of evidence. And I had numbered that from page 1 through to page 54 in the bundle that I provided to your committee services team, and I think that's been renumbered now by your committee services. So it starts at page 63 of the supplemental bundle and goes on to page 115. So I'm going to refer to pages 1 through to 54. Apologies if any of you are getting confused as to what document I'm referring to. Please do speak, and I will try and tell you what number it might be in your bundle. But what the bundle starts with at pages 1 to 8 are some general photographs of the hive area, all taken during the period in question, and showing for the most part that the area was quiet, largely deserted, and not covered in litter. Page 7 shows the upgraded social distancing marker tape that was installed following the exchange of emails on the 10th of June 2020. That's the EXDG22 and EXDG23 that I've previously referred you to. And page 8 shows the ice cream van. So this is page 70 of your bundle, at the bottom of the hill, and there throughout the vast majority of the photographs taken during this period, and in my submission, probably a very significant draw for people to queue at the Hythe, hang around at the Hythe, and enjoy an ice cream on a hot sunny day. So those are just some general photographs, and then at pages 9 to 12 are some photographs showing the refurbishment that was going on at the pub during the period in question. And you'll see some very extensive work being carried out, particularly ironically in the toilet areas. That's the photographs at pages 10 and 11. But what's important to note about this work is that it began in October 2019, so way before coronavirus was a thing, and so not something that Mr. Brett and his team had any control over in the context of what was going on during coronavirus and the extent to which they might have been able to make toilet facilities available to users of the takeaway facilities during this period. They simply couldn't, because there weren't any toilet facilities within the premises, even had people been allowed to go in to use them. And of course, the other thing to say about this refurbishment is that it's incurring an expenditure in the region of £180,000, which is a massive vote of confidence in a long-established licensed premises, which in my submission contributes greatly to the vibrancy and enjoyment that people take from the Hythe when they come and visit throughout the year, but particularly on a summer's day. And of course, it's fair to say that Mr. Brett and Mrs. Brett would not possibly have invested that sort of money in these premises had and then deliberately taken action that would have put that that license and the ability to recuperate that investment.
Mr. Feely, I'm sorry, we're in danger of straying again. We are concentrating on the Licensing Act and whether the licensee complied with the licensing objectives. His investment in the pub is laudable, but not relevant on this particular occasion. I've got Councillor Siddle wants a point of order. Is it any different from what's been mentioned, Councillor Siddle?
No, it was exactly that point. We're going off a complete enough tangent. This has got nothing to do with what we're looking at today. So could could Mr. Seeley please focus on the key matters and his evidence? Yeah,
Mr. Seeley, I think the point's been made twice now. Mr. Seeley, you are technically a witness on behalf of the licence holder. And I'm sure that members would just like to ask Mr. Brett a couple of questions.
Yes, of course.
Before we move on. I would just like to, you mentioned the fact that there is evidence and videos that social distancing is being observed by the customers. I would just draw your attention, and I would like a straight yes or no answer, no elaboration on the photograph on page 48 of the pack. Can you just tell me yes or no? Are the customers there? Bearing in mind the Queen's Head pub is closed, are those customers, in your view, exercising social distancing? Yes or no, please.
Sorry, I'm just turning to page 48. I've handed that to Mr. Brett because he's the witness, not me.
No, you're Mr. Brett's witness, because Mr.
I'm Mr. Brett's representative, and I'm very happy to speak on that basis, but I'm not his witness.
Well, I'd like a straightforward answer to a straightforward question. Okay. Are people shown in that photograph exercising social distancing? Because you have made the point that customers, on the whole, are behaving and exercising social distancing while at the pub.
And what I would say about that is that the people shown in that photograph, and we don't know where they've come from or what they're doing there, are gathered in small groups, and there are distances between the small groups. So you can see
Mr. Seeley, I can see people with drinks in their hand. I think it's a fair assumption that in the vast majority of cases, social distancing isn't being observed there. But I will leave that point made because and I accept the fact that off the premises, Mr. Brett has got no jurisdiction over that.
Yeah, but thank you.
You raised the point, sir, so I thought I would come back.
Okay.
Now, has anybody got any questions they would like to?
Sorry, Chair, I haven't completed my submissions. If you're determined to stop me, then all I would say is that
I would want your assurance that they are relevant to what we are discussing, and that is whether
yes.
the licensee has followed the licensing objectives.
Okay, well let me try and carry on then, if you don't mind. I was going to turn to pages 13 to 16. No, sorry, 13 to 18 of the bundle that I submitted. So this is pages 75 to 79 of the supplemental bundle, and just say, here's the evidence of skips being used at the premises and being used principally, but not exclusively, I accept, for the disposal of waste generated by the outdoor operations, the takeaway facility, and collected from the hive. So when Mr. Brett says there was routine litter picking, this is the evidence that we have of it, and I will leave you to look at that. Then the photographs from pages 19 to 30, so that's page 80 to 90, taking the steps by and large that council officers had advised him to take. So that's those photographs. My submissions go on to explain the steps not taken by the council. I won't reiterate those. And then the photographs from pages 32 to 38 show some general views of the area, particularly on sunny days. And of course, the period that we are talking about, May and June, we had some very lovely weather, particularly at the weekends. And what I want to particularly draw to your attention, but I would invite you to look at all of those photographs and note that, broadly speaking, people, albeit outside of the immediate control of Mr. Brett and his team, because they're on the hive and they're on the street, are socially distancing. They're socially distancing in small groups. The one photograph that I want to draw particularly to your attention is the photograph at page 37, so that's page 98 of the supplemental bundle, which is the queue of customers waiting to be served from the takeaway going up Church Street. And what I think this photograph demonstrates is that when people queue in a socially distanced manner, it looks like there's an awful lot of people queuing because of the gap between them. I've tried to count the number of people in this photograph a number of times, and I've come up with a number of about 16. And what they appear to be doing is they appear to be queuing in socially distanced family groups. So maybe couples with children, but broadly speaking, you can see that there are there is a good behaviour there by customers of the pub.
Mr. Seeley, you're making points that you've previously made in your cross-examination of Mr. Geller.
Okay.
If you I'd like to just move on to Mr. Brett very briefly.
Can I
don't want to keep going over old ground again, and I want to keep this really focused on these licensing objectives, because that is we are not here to determine whether the laws in respect or the guidelines in respect of PPE, social distancing, or anything else have been broken. This is specifically compliance with the licensing objectives.
Okay, well, all right. Let me just bring your attention to the specific representations by Mr. Brett concerning two incidents that form part of Mr. Geller's evidence. Firstly, this alleged fight on the 24th of May 2020, and then secondly, the wake on the 19th.
Can I stop you just very briefly, because you've made a point that licensees are not responsible for what happens off their premises. I would correct you in that they are. They have a responsibility. They are breaking the law if they knowingly serve somebody that is intoxicated. They are also responsible if they knowingly serve somebody who's going to subsequently drive, which is clearly off the premises. So just because things happen off the premises does not absolve the licensee from his licensing objectives. And I would say, particularly given allegedly that a lot of this antisocial behaviour happened in view of the licensed premises, I think we have to bear that in mind. Had people have gone off to the prom and done all of these various activities, it would have been a different matter. But most of it, and we've seen quite clearly from the photographs, with the exception of the litter in the planters on the high street, which I appreciate we can't attribute to the Jolly Sailor. Things have to be taken into account or in the immediate vicinity of that licensed premises. So, I really want to get on track, and I'd like to get this concluded as soon as possible, please.
Okay. Well, in that case, let me just ask you to consider Mr. Brett's response to the allegations about the fight on the 24th of May and the wake on the 19th of June. Essentially, neither of those things having anything to do with the pub. And in terms of littering, I've already explained littering was a general problem in the vicinity, but there is little or no evidence to link it expressly to the Jolly Sailor, and actually lots of evidence that we've produced to show that it was nothing to do with the Jolly Sailor. It was litter that simply didn't come from the premises at all, because it wasn't the sort of litter, the sort of products that the pub sells, or the type of packaging that the pub provides its food in. And then I'd ask you to consider very carefully the witness statements in support of Mr. Brett's position. They are witness statements that begin at page 104 of the supplemental bundle, and they consist of a mixture of statements from members of the public who have approached Mr. Brett. He hasn't approached them, and witness statements from members of staff at the pub who explain the efforts that they took and some of the grief, to be fair, that they received from some aggrieved local residents. And then in terms of the relevant representations received, two things briefly to say about those. The first is that two of them are supportive of the Jolly Sailor, which in my submission on a premises licence review application, I've never seen it before. I think that's extremely unusual and extremely welcome. And again, Mr. Brett will confirm that he doesn't personally know either of the individuals who have made relevant representations in support of the pub. And insofar as the representations from the other individuals, Mr. and Mrs. Gibbs and Mr. Goulding, are concerned, I'm not sure if you know this, because I think the bundle that I have seen that you've been provided with of the relevant representations have been redacted to a greater extent than the copies that I was initially provided with. So it might be, I think it is important for me to outline which of the representations I'm talking about. So I'm talking now about the representations at pages 39 and 40 of your, I think it's your supplemental bundle. These are the ones beginning, Dear MDC, we are in full agreement with the need to review the premises licence granted to the Jolly Sailor, Church Street, Malden. And then the further representation at page 38. And that's the one that begins, I fully support your application for the review of a premises licence at Jolly Sailor, Church Street. All I want to say about those, and particularly about the ones at pages 39 and 40, is that these representations are made by a couple who own a property on the Hythe, and it runs a bed and breakfast, or they run a bed and breakfast service from their home. As such, the Jolly Sailor is a direct competitor to them, because the Jolly Sailor has 3 bed and breakfast rooms that were refurbished in 2018. So there is a degree of commercial competition going on here.
Mr. Seeley, I think you've made your point, and okay. I think members.
I mean, the problem, of course, Chair, is I can't cross-examine them.
Mr. Seeley, no, I appreciate that fact, and I'm going to draw you to a close there, because I think during your cross-examination of Mr. Geller and your statement, yep, certainly made a very thorough job in support of the licence holder, which is of course what you're there for. Mr. Geller, you now have an opportunity to cross-examine Mr. Seeley, and members have an opportunity to ask Mr. Seeley questions.
Really only one question, and it just relates to the pictures, and I'm just getting to the page number, bear with me. Okay, so if I refer to page 88, the pictures of the serving areas, can I just check, when is Mr. Brett able to confirm when he put up additional signage on those serving areas?
I'm gonna swing the camera around so that you can see him.
On the day I spoke to you and the subsequent email, those were put straight up.
Those put straight up. And yeah, from the looks of it, and I'm looking at the picture, page 95, it's not very clear because it's sideways, but where I've moved it, just to confirm, the larger sign that's taped to the edge of the serving area, is that, yep, a menu, or is that a COVID warning?
That's a price list. That's
a price list. There's two. Yeah. Sorry, there's one smaller bit of paper that's actually hanging off the end of the table.
That's the sign that says polite notice.
Right, and were those handwritten or printed?
Printed.
They were printed. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I please ask why they weren't made more robust or prominent, bearing in mind the concerns we had about? And I accept the fact that The questions have been raised about what the council can do, but in terms of your own premises.
We put up 15 of the signs on the front of the cottage, on the gazebos, on the hill, and on the windows of the Jolly as you're walking down. So 15 signs were very prominent.
Okay, were those handwritten or printed?
All printed.
And were they laminated in any ways that they were robust, or were they just sellotaped up?
Initially they were sellotaped up, then they were laminated. In the first instance they were sellotaped.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Geller. Do you have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Seeley before I'm going to ask Mr. Brett to make a statement? Yeah, Mr. Councillor Siddle.
I just wanted to check, are we asking questions to Mr. Brett and to Mr. Seeley at the same time?
Well, technically to Mr. Seeley.
Okay. So at the moment,
bear in mind, of course, Mr. Brett is sitting next to Mr. Seeley. Yeah, that's difficult.
So at the moment, I don't have any questions until I've heard from Mr. Brett.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Members, any other members before we get Mr. Brett to make a statement? Thank you.
Not from me,
you're going to have to twiddle your computer again, Mr. Seeley. I would just like a statement for members. Good afternoon, Mr. Brett. Thank you very much for attending. So this is your opportunity. Clearly, Mr. Seeley has provided us with a great deal of information in defence of this hearing. So now's your opportunity to say anything you wish, and then members, it's quite clear. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to point out that I've owned the Jolly Sailor for over 30 years plus. we don't have trouble down there. I have zero tolerance to drugs, zero tolerance to underage. We shut the place early. We don't have loud music outside. Effectively, we're respectful to our neighbours. I've been here an awful long time, and the two neighbours that have orchestrated this particular debacle have a grudge to settle. Okay, a lot of people did appear down there, but they weren't coming to us. They were using that as a walk through to the prom. They were coming off of the prom. The amount I witnessed personally, people walking down with crates of beer, coming out first stop, cans of Stella, which we don't sell cans. There was more product down there than we could have ever hoped to sell. To give you an idea, our average take on a day was about £1,000. So if you work it backwards, our top line product being £4.50, if everybody bought one single item, it's only 220 people. Most people bought multiple items. So we were controlled. I couldn't control what was going on the quayside. I had no jurisdiction over it. The trouble with the incident with the fight, one came down Church Street, holding can of Stella, one came from Mill Street. The fight started up in the town outside the tanning shop, and they decided to carry on. It was all over a dog and a ex-girlfriend. When the police turned up, the people just standing around sat and explained to the police. I obviously went over to them exactly what had gone on. And they said, right, it's a skirmish. That was the end of it. But this was nothing to do with alcohol we'd sold, nothing to do with the people who were who had bought from us. On the subject of the funeral, as soon as we saw the numbers, the person concerned was the local, shall we say, personality. They stopped at every pub in the town going through, and he had a lot of, shall we say, followers. He was I believe he was one of the drinkers out of Warwick. Because the Warwick was shut and they couldn't gain access to that, they decided to go on the quayside. As soon as we saw what was happening, we killed it from our aspect. We can't be responsible for people walking down there, and when I say walking down there, with absolute little cases of beer.
Okay. That's your statement, Mr. Brett, is it? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Siddle, now's your opportunity to ask your question of Mr. Brett.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Brett, when you decided to open, what did you see as the impact of you opening earlier in the year?
We looked at it. There was a number of people gathering down there. The kiosks were opening. There was people going down there with food. I live down there. I mean, people turning up at like 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning with Domino's pizzas, kebabs, all sorts of things was going on down there. We thought, well, okay, if we could offer a service, it would serve the local community, and 99.99% of the people were happy with what we'd done. We'd done things lawfully, we'd done things correctly. We didn't serve people who were intoxicated, and in intent, the people who were intoxicated had nothing to do with us.
Did you see, in terms of the condition of the premises though, did you see any impact in terms of opening when your premises were in that condition?
From my understanding, and I took the lead from Malden Council, whose toilets were closed, if the toilets had been open, I couldn't have allowed people on the premises. I took my lead from Malden Council on that one.
Okay, so the fact that you couldn't provide them with toilets, you didn't see a problem with that?
To be honest, no one in the area was open. And then I looked at other people doing exactly the same operation in Kent, in Essex, and they didn't have toilets facilities.
Okay. Yeah, you said that you live on the premises and you obviously witness things. What did you do in terms of taking the initiative to solve some of these actions? What did you try and do to try?
For example, when we after the first couple of days, we realised that there's a problem with litter. So then we made sure every hour one of the girls or the boys went out with black sacks, picked up all our stuff, and to a certain degree certain other people's stuff, and we put it onto our premises into our skips. So that was one problem we saw. If the numbers got too great, we shut early. If, for example, my office is in Dartford, so I normally go to Dartford first thing in the morning. So I'd come up about 6 o'clock, and there'd be rubbish there, not down to us. And I think Mr. Geller can confirm that I had a conversation with him about, instead of doing the collection, emptying the bins at 10 in the morning, why didn't they do them very early in the morning so the bins were empty? I had a 24-minute conversation with him about it.
Okay. How many times did you shut early?
Oh, more times than the latest we were open was 8 o'clock.
But how many times did you say, okay, there's too much disturbance, there's too much of a problem? So how many times did you actually do that over that time period?
I suppose about 10 times that I considered they were the wrong type of people down there.
Okay. And
sorry, you can also point out, I've been in Malden a long time. I know the people that I consider the wrong type of people were people that would not be allowed in the jolly.
Okay. What would you say that you've learned from this?
Well, I've learned from this effectively that, God forbid we have another situation like that, we won't be operating in that particular manner. We'll be very guarded in what we do. And to the fact of we've carried on the outside operation all the way through after the pub's opened, it's still used because a lot of people don't want to be inside. They'd rather buy a drink or a burger or a cup of tea or coffee and sit away from people. So we're still offering that service. Of course, during the winter now, that will limit it down. We're only going to operate on the Saturday and Sunday if the weather's permitting. So really the thing has fizzled itself out anyway.
Okay. So in terms of how you're operating at the moment, people are inside your premises as well as outside.
That's correct.
Okay. So if you go back to when you decided to do the opening and open from your terraces, would you say would you do the same thing again?
In hindsight, I would alter it.
Okay, and how would you alter it?
And effectively, we wouldn't go to the hours that we were at. We would only probably operate between sort of 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock outside. We wouldn't, if there was groups gathering, then we'd just cease it.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Siddle. Any other members wish to ask Mr. Brett a question? Mr. Brett, I just want to ask a couple. When the full lockdown was lightened, it wasn't lifted, and licensed premises had some sort of leeway to reopen. Given the fact that the Queen's Head is right next door to you, did you not think that perhaps you should get your heads together and come up with a plan to open jointly to
4th of July, licensing officers walking around. I can tell you exactly what time it was. At 4 o'clock, I went over and saw Gavin at the Queen's Head. I said, right, what time are you going to shut tonight? Will we be in line with you? So we agreed a strategy of shutting at the same time.
But you didn't get your heads together prior to reopening in your takeaway.
We never saw any of the Queen's Head staff. Unlike my staff that weren't furlonged, I think they were all furlonged. There wasn't anybody living on the premises that I could see. I think the owner of it lives at the Anchor at Danbury, so I think the premises were deserted. I can't confirm that, but that's my understanding of it.
But given the fact that then you were in full knowledge that yours was likely to be the only licensed premises open in that particular area.
That's not actually correct, because sorry, can I just
interrupt? Yeah, please.
The Little Ship Club, what they would do, the members there were walking in and out, and they were sitting on the quayside drinking booze from the Little Ship Club. They would sit. They had some chairs. They were taking chairs out of there. So that was going on next door.
So that's a members club, Mr. Brett, isn't it? And I'm just thinking, you were probably the only pub within a reasonable distance. So there was every expectation that the people that have been gasping for a drink for several weeks were likely to come and frequent. And I've got there's absolutely no problem. You have a business to run, and provided that you work within the law, that's your prerogative. And let's face it, we all know how hard it is for the hospitality industry, and particularly now.
Yes.
And nobody's here to criticise the fact that you chose to open. What we're here to look at is whether you took due regard of the licensing objectives. Now, you're a long-standing licensee and personal license holder, and as I'm not going to embarrass you by getting you to recite the licensing objectives, because I know you know them off by heart. But at any stage while you were open, while you were in this fairly unique position of being the only licensed premises, and were busy, no reason why you shouldn't be busy, did you at any time stand there and think that you may be in contravention of one of those 4 licensing objectives? That is, prevention of crime, disorder, public safety, prevention of public nuisance, or protection of children. Did you at any time look out and think, oh crikey, if it goes on like this, I may be contravening one of those objectives?
I'll give you an example of one of the things that I did. We put draft lager on. It brought immediately wrong people down there. We ceased it that day. So I was careful of what was going on. If I considered that something was going to be a problem, it was like the problem with the funeral. As soon as I saw what was going on, that was enough. And we did it in such a way, if we just shut and gone, it would have caused aggravation. So we wound it down very slowly, not to wind any situation up. Another particular day, there were some people on the quayside. They brought bottles of champagne down. They had a little beatbox. So where we've been accused about the music, we didn't have any music. Effectively, all we had background music had to go very low so that the staff could hear what people were saying when they were ordering. But on the quayside, there was always somebody with a beatbox and an iPod. I got woken up one night at 1 o'clock in the morning, and there was some I'm going to say foreign gentlemen, and shouting and screaming, dancing around something in some language I didn't recognise. And these were the things that were happening. Because the weather was so pleasant, people were turning up there all sorts of odd hours, which were completely nothing to do with us because we were closed.
Thank you, Mr. Brett. So basically, yes, you did think that some of the things we were doing were going to cause a problem, but you took what you saw as being the correct mitigation.
If I saw a problem, I would stop the problem.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's an answer to the question. Councillor Stilts, you'd like to ask a question, and then we'll wind up, I think.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, Mr. Brett has just answered my question. I was going to ask him about the allegation of music making a party-type atmosphere down the quay, and whether they did actually play loud music at the premises at any time. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is, if I explain, all our music is what we call background music. So it's not, it's more jazzy type music. It's done quietly because we're that type of pub. We've never had loud music. Now, somebody accused me of being on the quayside dancing. Well, let me tell you, I can barely walk. I've just had I've been to drive for 8 months. I still can't walk straight. So to dance I wish, only I could wish to dance at the moment.
All right.
This is the nonsense that was coming out.
Do you have external speakers, Mr. Brett? Loudspeakers?
Yeah. Yes, we do. We do have external speakers. There's 2 out there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Can I also point out?
Yeah, of course.
Right. If you look at some of the emails I sent, the people at 32 are members of the Little Shed Club. We've been at variance with them over their noise. There's copies of emails to Environmental Health about their loud music going on to the middle of the night, even though they're only licensed to 12.
Which, whilst that period of history is continuing, it is no longer the same we found ourselves in during that period, both in terms of the extent to which we are now in a lockdown or not in a lockdown, but also and very significantly to the extent that we are now entering the winter period rather than the summer. I've heard say a little while ago, the reality is that the takeaway facility that is the subject of this application is not going to be operating at anything like the capacity or the number of days that it was previously. Mr. Brett explained to me that yesterday the outside bar area took about 120 quid in takings yesterday, so on a Sunday in the winter. So this is an issue it was before. Toilets are now open everywhere as well, and so really any attempt that you might take to take steps, for example, to remove the permission for off sales is very much closing the stable door, not after the horse has bolted, but after the horse has returned to the stable and sat down and is munching away on its oats.
Yeah, Mr. Seeley, we fully appreciate exactly what you've been saying. These are strange and challenging times for all of us. We are looking back on the evidence that we have had for what happened in May and June. We're not looking forward into what may happen in the next 6 months. So just if you we totally acknowledge the fact and that you're making some of the actions open to us may compromise Mr. Brett's business, and we are fully cognizant with the seriousness of the decisions that we're about to make. So please rest assured we will take everything into account fairly.
Thank you. What I would say just in finishing is that, of course, any steps that you decide that you might think are appropriate to take today, they can't stop the sale of takeaway food because that's not late night refreshment, so it's not a license. They can't stop. Well, they could stop, but in my submission it would be entirely disproportionate to stop on sales of alcohol because there's no evidence that any on sales have caused any of these problems, and I don't think Mr. Geller has ever suggested that. So that all you could realistically do is stop the off sale of alcohol, but food could still be taken away. People could still consume alcohol in the premises and wander inside the lake. So I think you need to bear in mind that that realistically any kind of response to any kind of proportionate response in any way, shape or form to the allegations complained of is not going to result in no activity happening at the pub at all. And of course, and again, I'm sorry to labour the point, but what you have to be satisfied about, because you're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, so you need to be satisfied on a balance of probabilities that the problems complained of by Mr. Geller in his submissions are problems that are expressly causally linked to the Jolly Sailor. And in my submission, you can't be satisfied of those things. And in any event, the action that Mr. Geller seeks you to take, namely the removal of off sales, won't solve any particular problems complained of, because of the fact that people can still get off sales from other premises.
No license in 2005, along with Mr. Bett. So I know what are and what are not licensable activities, and so please be assured that we are as a committee not not wet behind the gills. We are fairly experienced in this. So, and you know, I can absolutely assure you that we will give a fair hearing.
Thank you.
So is that the conclusion?
Let me just turn to Mr. Brett and see if there's anything else he wants me to say. I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Geller, it's now your opportunity to make a final closing statement, please.
Thank you, Councillor. The main closing statement I would make is that we believe that the serving areas on the upper decks and the ability to provide off-cells are what's at the heart of this. I've done my best to try and present the evidence available to me in a way that sort of explains the difficulties that we were facing and the challenges relating to COVID. If members believe that the operations on the upper deck represent a risk of COVID transmission to members of the public, if they believe that there's a risk to children, if they believe that there's possibility of nuisance arising from the operation on the upper deck, then we would strongly support some sort of conditions to try and mitigate that. It's certainly part of you know, a wider aspiration that we try and improve the situation down there, and really just to ask members to bear in mind that it was never the council's intention to try and put the Jolly Sailor out of business. This is not where we're heading, but we do believe that there is a better way for them to operate other than the capacity under which they're currently operating. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Geller. Members, before we close this meeting to make our deliberations, have any other members got any comments they wish to make, please?
No, thank you, Chairman.
No, thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Stilts?
No, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. So this meeting will now close. We will reconvene. The members of this committee only will reconvene to make our decision. Mr. Seeley, as you know, you will be notified within 5 working days of this hearing, the result that we come to, and of course you are able to appeal against any decision within 21 days, and as you know, the appeal is determined by magistrates rather than ourselves. Thank you very much for putting together such a comprehensive support of Mr. Brett. Thank you, Mr. Geller, for your hard work. And as I said, we are now going to close the meeting and reconvene to make our deliberations. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.